We have been telling you since 2007 and 8 that literally we have fake news operations in this country, liberal, mainstream, to destroy Trump media. They have a vendetta, and they're showing it every day. Their number one goal is to damage and destroy the president you elected, and clearly by any means necessary. And spreading fake news helps them to do this. Now, we've been saying since 08, journalism in America is dead. But what is happening now is far worse, more destructive, more than anything we could have imagined. This is now outright propaganda every day. For example, on Friday, fake news CNN, they go wall to wall, breathless reporting on a story. It turns out to be a big fat lie. Now, the Clinton News Network falsely claimed that Donald Trump Jr. received an email on September the 4th, 2016, that gave him special access to hacked DNC emails that were later released by WikiLeaks. Unfortunately, the report, as usual, completely wrong. Here's the truth. The email that was sent to Donald Trump Jr. was actually dated September 14th, not 4th, 2016, which is the day after WikiLeaks put out the DNC documents. Now, fake news CNN, they hyped the story as the big smoking gun about Trump and Russia collusion and claimed they had not one but two sources verifying this false claim. Take a look at CNN's original fake news reporting.
CNN has exclusive new details about a message sent in the final stretch of the 2016 campaign offering access to hacked WikiLeaks documents.
This email on September 4th, 2016 was sent to Donald Trump, then candidate Donald Trump Jr., and others in the Trump organization. The timeline is important here because on September 4th, that was months after the DNC was hacked and after their own emails became leaked. And it was a month before Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta's emails were leaked by WikiLeaks.
If this was an attempt to give stolen emails, hacked emails to the Trump campaign, and the Trump campaign acted on it, you would have an argument that they were then in possession of stolen property, property they knew to be stolen.
Right.
Now, that can be a crime under federal law. It clearly can be a crime, by the way, under New York law.
Crime. No, not quite. Now, it didn't take long for the rest of the sheep in the liberal press, like Conspiracy TV, MSNBC, to take CNN's fake news and spread it to their Trump-hating audience. You can't make this stuff up. Watch this.
This is coming into our NBC newsroom right now. Congressional investigators are trying to figure out who sent an email that gave Donald Trump, his son, and others a decryption key for hacked WikiLeaks documents.
This was about September 2016, right in the middle of the campaign when WikiLeaks was putting out some documents, hadn't put out other documents. Remember, the Russians had hacked the Democrats and handed this stuff over to WikiLeaks. It goes to the heart of the collusion question, right? Because WikiLeaks was essentially acting as an agent of Russian intelligence, publishing hacked emails that hurt the Democrats and helped Donald Trump.
So fake news CNN story about Donald Trump Jr. and WikiLeaks, it was a lie. In fact, CNN's report was so outrageous, other news outlets started calling them out, even the Washington Post. That gets interesting. Now, CNN was caught red-handed. They were forced to correct the record. Now, keep in mind, this is the same CNN. They used the motto, facts first. So we have a question tonight for the head of CNN, the chief of fake news, Jeff Zucker. Jeff, are you proud of your network? By the way, not the first time this year. Do facts come first, Jeff Zucker? When your network repeatedly tries to smear and slander the president with outright lies, you have become nothing but an extension of the DNC. And I have to tell you, that Donald Jr. story was devoid of facts. And after being humiliated on Friday, Zucker then sent his stenographer, Humpty Dumpty, Brian Stelter, to try and clean up this whole mess. Now, instead of profusely apologizing, like he should have, Humpty Dumpty tried to use his network's complete and utter fake news failure to attack President Trump. That's a nice way to try and fix it. Watch this.
With ABC's suspension of Ross still in the headlines, I asked CNN if there would be disciplinary action against Raju or his co-writer, Jeremy Herb. A spokeswoman said no, because the reporters followed CNN's standards process, which means that the anonymous sources they were using for the story were vetted and okayed ahead of time. Now, the sources had been reliable in the past, but they were not this time. On Friday night, President Trump seized on the recent corrections at a rally in Florida.
Look, reporters, journalists make mistakes. Our record as journalists in covering this Trump story and the Russian story is pretty good, especially compared to the record of Donald Trump and his serial lying.
Now, he is a bitter partisan. Now, it's even pathetic by fake CNN standards. Now, earlier today, the White House press secretary, Sara absolutely schooled. This is a one-on-one on how to be a press secretary. CNN's very aggressive and opinionated and biased Jim Costa after he tried to defend the network's false reporting. Watch this.
And I would just say, Sara, that journalists make honest mistakes, and that doesn't make them fake news. But the question that
when journalists make honest mistakes, they should own up to them. Sometimes, and a lot of times you don't. But there's a difference. There's a very big. I'm sorry, I'm not finished. There's a very big difference between making honest mistakes and purposefully misleading the American people. Something that happens regularly. You can't say I'm not done. You cannot say. You cannot say that it's an honest mistake when you're purposely putting out information that you know to be false.
Now, fake news CNN isn't alone in spreading lies and fake news aimed at hurting the president. A Washington Post reporter was forced to apologize this weekend after tweeting out this highly misleading photo about the crowd size at President Trump's rally on Friday. Turns out that image that you see right there, that was taken well before President Trump ever stepped on the stage. And President Trump responded to that fake news report by tweeting out photos during his speech that showed a packed house and writing, quote, "Oh, very different." At Dave Weigel over at the Washington Post put out a phony photo of an arena empty hours before I arrived at the venue with thousands of people outside on their way in. Real photos now show, as I spoke, packed house, many people unable to get in, demand apology and retraction from fake news Washington Post. The president added this, quote, Dave Weigel of the Washington Post just admitted his picture was a fake, a fraud, showing an almost empty arena last night in my speech in Pensacola when, in fact, he knew the arena was packed, as shown also on TV. Fake news. He should be fired. Now, that photo is the perfect example of how the Destroy Trump media, the biased media in this country, attempts to embarrass, delegitimize this president over insignificant, superfluous things at every turn. And just like in other examples, this one blew up in the fake news media's faces because the truth eventually, hopefully, does come out. And because President Trump, he refuses to sit back and let the media spread lies day in and day out. But for the press in this country, nothing is too small and too petty. They will literally attempt to use anything and everything to attack the president. Take a look at this headline from the New York Times this weekend. Quote, inside Trump's hour-by-hour battle for self-preservation. Now, the Times, the so-called investigative reporting over there, includes explosive information like the president has up to 12 Diet Cokes a day. That's pretty laughable. It's right up there with CNN's 2 scoops of ice cream for him, but only 1 for his guests. Now, the other bombshell fact from the New York Times report claims that President Trump watches up to 8 hours of television a day. Now, President Trump rightfully blasted the paper by tweeting, quote, another false story, this time in the failing New York Times, that I watch 4 to 8 hours of television a day. Wrong. Also, I seldom, if ever, watch CNN or MSNBC, both of which I consider fake news. I never watched Don Lemon, who I once called the dumbest man on television. Bad reporting. The media in this country has a massive credibility crisis. Look at the headline, recent Politico Morning Consult poll. 46% think the media make up stories about Donald Trump. The American people don't trust the media anymore, and nor should they. It's because they're constantly, regularly peddling an agenda and fake news. Now, here's another couple of examples. Now, last week, both Bloomberg and Reuters, they ran wild with that story, claiming that the special counsel, Robert Mueller's team, had subpoenaed President Trump and his family's bank records from Deutsche Bank. Now, President Trump's legal team, they shot down those rumors, and eventually Bloomberg and Reuters had to admit they were wrong yet again and issue corrections. And if you think that's bad, there's, of course, last week, ABC News' Brian Ross. Well, he takes the crown for pushing fake news because earlier this month, Ross claimed that General Michael Flynn was prepared to testify that candidate Trump ordered him to contact the Russians. Take a look.
This certainly would seem to suggest that Michael Flynn had a fair amount of information to offer the special counsel in return.
That's right, George. He has promised full cooperation to the Mueller team. He's prepared to testify, we are told by a confidant, against President Trump, against members of the Trump family, and others in the White House. He is prepared to testify that President Trump, as a candidate, Donald Trump, directed him to make contact with the Russians, which contradicts all that Donald Trump has said at this point.
Then hours later, Brian Ross was forced to admit that he was completely wrong, and he attempted to correct the record yet again. This is an epidemic. Watch this.
David, a clarification tonight on something one of Flynn's confidants told us, and we reported earlier today. He said the president had asked Flynn to contact Russia during the campaign. He's now clarifying that, saying, according to Flynn, candidate Trump asked him during the campaign to find ways to repair relations with Russia and other hotspots. And then after the election, the president-elect asked him and told him to contact Russia on issues, including working together to fight ISIS.
By the way, he's suspended and is no longer allowed to cover President Trump. Shocking. Now, there's obviously a huge difference between Brian Ross's original report and what actually happened. That's why he got suspended for 4 weeks without pay, and he's been banned from reporting now on the president in the future. You would think with all these fake news embarrassments that maybe the media would end this hysterical and breathless ongoing daily reporting of the president and maybe just focus on facts and trying to get it right, supposedly for consumers of news. Here's the thing. The Destroy Trump media, they have been getting worse and spreading more lies about Donald Trump since the minute he decided to run for president. This is not going to change. Mainstream media has now taken a point of almost zero accountability in reporting fake news. Now, Glenn Greenwald from The Intercept sums it up perfectly with this headline, quote, the U.S. media suffered its most humiliating debacle in ages, now refuses all transparency over what happened. Now, the media's hatred for the president is so profound and so extreme that nothing else matters to them. They don't care about the truth. Now, think about that. They don't care, or being fair, or being balanced, not biased. And by the way, we've been saying that the press is fixated on taking this president down. I believe that to be true. That's their shared mission. It's precisely why President Trump is calling this a concerted effort and a, quote, stain on America. And in that sense, the president's right. Members of the mainstream media, they're just an extension of the DNC, and they're fraudulent. Now, they're rigid, they're radical, left-wing ideologues. They masquerade. They call themselves journalists. They're not journalists. They think they're keepers of the truth. The press, remember, got caught colluding with Hillary Clinton in her campaign, and they've been doing everything possible to inflict maximum damage on the president you elected, regardless of whether it's true or not. Now, everything we've just shown you proves all of this. Now, the truth, facts don't matter to the media. Let me put it more simply. They are morally bankrupt. They have an agenda. They don't care about the truth. The agenda is the Democratic Party's agenda, the Clintons' agenda. And as a result, the press has now created a massive informational crisis in this country. And by the way, they are doing a tremendous disservice to all of us. Joining us now with reaction, former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer. I know that in the time that you were press secretary, you tried to get along, you tried to be nice. It seems nothing you could do would ever appease that group that was in that White House press corps. Am I overstating it?
No, I don't think so at all. Look, I think that a free press is essential to a democracy. But mistakes like the ones that you're talking about undermine the credibility and the trust that the press has. And the problem is that if you can't trust one story or one source in a story, one of these millions of unnamed anonymous sources, which stories do you believe? Which sources do you believe in these stories? I think that's the problem, is that you can't sort of pick and choose one or the other, which stories to believe and which stories not to, when you see these mass amount of incorrect and malicious attacks on the president and conservative policies. But there's a bigger point here, Sean, which is that in the Brian Ross story, it moved markets. People lost money because of this mistake. And here's what I think the true egregious nature of this is. And what Brian Ross did in the clip that you played is something that happens all too often. They don't correct it. They don't apologize for it. They, quote, update it. And that's a cop-out. When they're wrong, they update their story and just say, we have additional information. When someone else makes a mistake or adds something to it, they say that they lied or misled them. They hold everybody else to one standard and themselves to quite another.
Sean, I even think it's bigger, because if you look over the last year, the whole the whole Trump-Russia collusion story, after a year, has been debunked, has not been proven true. But there is a Russia collusion story. That's Hillary. Now we know, in spite of a year of denials, that she and her campaign and her running the DNC per Donna Brazil and their money, they paid Fusion GPS, that hired Michael Steele, that paid Russians for lies about then-candidate Donald Trump. And it spread like wildfire. Isn't that the same as colluding to influence the American people in the middle of an election with Russian lies?
Well, look, I've been in Republican politics now for over 25 years. I've seen this, whether you're talking about campaigns or on policy matters. The left-wing liberal narrative wins every time.
Yeah, I'm not asking that, I'm asking that we have Russia collusion. There's a real story.
Oh,
she bought and paid for that phony, salacious Russian propaganda that got spread to influence Americans.
Well, it's not just that. You look at the Uranium One deal. You look at the number of speeches that Bill Clinton gave over in Russia and got paid for. I mean, there is a clear and concrete case of what they did with respect to Russia that is entirely ignored by the mainstream media.
All right. There's also something else that's happening here. You have now, for those that follow this show, you're familiar with it. And that is, we have discovered that Robert Mueller's team, that James Comey put the fix in with this other individual that works for the FBI that we all became known about last week, and that literally they're writing her exoneration without doing the complete investigation. Now, didn't the media get a little suspicious about 33,000 deleted emails in the bathroom of a mom and pop shop, that it did have classified top secret special access program information on it? Mishandling information that type of information is a felony. Destroying that information is a felony. And then, just for good measure, she used bleach bit and acid washed the hard drives and then busted up all the devices that were connected to that. Now, the fact that exoneration, Peter Strzok and James Comey wrote the exoneration before they investigated, I don't know anybody in the media that's doing their job. It's what they choose not to cover that also is corrupt to me.
Well, and you also remember that the DNC largely wouldn't allow the FBI's to even examine their servers, and no one seemed to have a problem with that. I mean, there's a lot about what happened last cycle that I think has largely been swept under the rug, and none of the key questions are actually being asked. And I think it's amazing how, when you have concrete facts on one side that should leave people to want to get a deeper understanding of what happened, that's ignored, and all of this salacious, hypothetical ideas is what we spend the time focusing on. I think our priorities are, or at least the media's priorities, are backwards on where the problems are.
It's never been this bad. My 30th year in radio, my 23rd year here at Fox, it has never, ever, ever been this bad. All right, you have some big announcement. Go ahead, hit us with it. What is it? Is it good or bad?
I think it's good. It's good. And I think it's largely driven off what you're talking about right now. I looked back at the coverage of the campaign, the transition, and the first 6-7 months of this White House, and realized the stories that are being told are not an accurate representative of what President Trump went through to get the nomination, to transition to the White House, and then his first 6 months in office. And I'm going to write a book that'll come out in in the summer of 2018. If you go to my Twitter feed at Sean Spicer, people can sign up and keep track of when it's going to be published and get inside information. But I've decided that it is incumbent upon me to set the record straight and give people a real understanding of what happened through each of those crucial points in our history.
This was probably one of the most fascinating elections ever in that regard, considering all of the forces that were against Donald Trump. And all the media that night that he won, it was like one big funeral. I look forward to it.
There's a lot of stuff that those guys got wrong, from the campaign through the transition through the White House. I want to set the record straight.
Good for you. All right, Sean, good to see you. Thank you.
It's been a big news day here in the nation's capital and in New York City, where an ISIS follower botched a terror attack. A pipe bomb strapped to his chest malfunctioned after detonation at the Port Authority subway station, one of the city's main transportation hubs. And surprise, surprise, he got into America via, wait for it, chain migration. So isn't it time to ditch this dangerous policy, finally? I'm going to ask Univision anchor Jorge Ramos what he thinks of the chain migration debate in light of today's events. and with accusations of partisanship surrounding the Mueller investigation. Former federal prosecutor Andy McCarthy will be here to explain how the Mueller probe may be missing the most important Russia story of all. But first, the media's desperate attempt to divert attention from their repeated screw-ups. That's the subject of tonight's angle. It wasn't just another fake news story attempting to tie President Trump to Russia. CNN's disgraceful reporting of last week seems like a watershed moment, a blatant example of the establishment media's reckless coverage of the so-called Russia collusion story. On Friday, you'll recall CNN reported that WikiLeaks tried to share hacked documents with the Trump campaign and Don Trump Jr. back in September of 2016. And that report was quickly picked up by other news organizations. But it turned out those documents had already been made public, and the dates of the Don Jr. emails reported by CNN were false. The bombshell quickly blew up in CNN's face. CNN never retracted the story, but took 5 hours to post a correction after it was debunked. On Sunday, the host of CNN's Reliable Sources, Brian, a.k.a. Shoeless Stetler, refused to explain how the network got the story so wrong. Instead, what he did is he trotted out that old Watergate dinosaur, Carl Bernstein, and the perpetual Trump critic, David Frum, who both ignored the question of how CNN botched the story. Though they did revert to the CNN party line, and, well, they just attacked the president.
The sources weren't trying to trick the reporters. The sources were just mistaken. But that mistake obviously caused a black eye for CNN.
Journalists make mistakes. Our record as journalists in covering this Trump story and the Russian story is pretty good, especially compared to the record of Donald Trump.
From the president and his supporters, you hear a system of lies. So they're not well placed to complain. The worst mistakes that press organizations have made in the coverage of Trump has precisely occurred in their overzealous effort to be fair to the president.
Wait a second. Now, CNN concocts a damaging story about the president, and they only did so because they're trying to be utterly fair to him? I'm not following any of this. I need to buy a major vowel or two. The media are destroying their credibility, whatever is left of it, by allowing politics to dominate editorial decisions and color their reporting. This is no way to build public confidence. And by the way, it's not just CNN. ABC's Brian Ross reported that candidate Trump instructed Michael Flynn to reach out to the Russians when it was actually President-elect Trump. Oops. The Washington Post reporter, Dave Weigel, let's not forget him, he tweeted a photo from the Trump rally in Florida on Friday showing lots and lots of empty seats. Didn't look good. Turns out he took the picture before the audience had actually entered the arena. That's cute. He did apologize later. But not surprisingly, polls show the American public is losing faith in how the media are covering Trump. A Quinnipiac poll last month found 58% of American voters disapprove of the way the media covers the president, while only 38% approve. 53% of voters said the media focuses too much on negative stories about Trump. So the media's answer today? More negative stories about Trump. Well, in an attempt, I think, to revive some of their flagging ratings and maybe distract from their own journalistic and sex abuse scandals, the networks dragged out Trump accusers again. The president, of course, has denied these allegations, but that didn't stop Megyn Kelly from showcasing them on her own struggling morning show. So much for her staying out of politics. Wasn't that she said she was going to do? Well, they then held a press conference sponsored by a Soros-backed group called Brave New Films. Peel back the curtain a little bit. Brave New Films describes itself as a quick strike media company that has produced a string of liberal documentaries. Establishment media tripped over themselves to take the bait and turn today's White House press briefing into a total circus.
Jim?
If I may, though, I was going to ask a question about something else.
Well, you used it on something else. Jim?
If I may,
Sarah. Not today. We're going to keep moving, guys.
If I can ask about the president's accusations.
Have you ever been sexually harassed, and do you understand, and I'm not saying by the president, I'm saying ever, This is spinning, and it's focused on him now.
And he's addressed it directly to the American people.
It's coming up new and afresh, and more people are now speaking out.
April, I'm going to keep moving.
I understand,
but
but will the
cover as many of your
president
colleagues
address the nation
today.
on this? This is a huge issue, Sarah.
Yeah, North Korea, all this. But this is a huge issue. Yeah, it's a huge issue for a media obsessed with driving Trump from office at all costs. Well, now, on the day before the Alabama Senate election, as we predicted last week when Democrats ran Al Franken out of the Senate without so much as a scheduled hearing, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is calling for President Trump to resign from office. This is a craven attempt to weaken the president with these choreographed allegation parades. But, my friends, they won't work. But at least now it's easier to see with whom certain media organizations are colluding and to what end. And that's the angle.